Deep beneath the North Sea, dozens of meters below the surface, the German submarine U-1206 moved in complete silence, while more than 50 men were trapped inside its steel hull, hearing nothing but the sound of the engines and the water crashing against the submarine. It was April 14th, 1945, less than a month before the end of World War II. German Captain Karl Adolf Schlitt was leading his very first combat patrol, and everything was going exactly as planned. The submarine had not detected a single enemy ship. Allied forces had not discovered its position, and the crew carried out their duties calmly. The engineers monitored the engines and batteries, while the sailors prepared for many more hours beneath the sea. But within just a few minutes, this quiet mission turned into one of the strangest military disasters in history. Seawater suddenly began rushing into the submarine. Then poisonous chlorine gas spread through its narrow passageways. The captain was left with only one choice: to surface the submarine. Even though he knew Allied aircraft and warships were searching for any German submarine that appeared above the water, even for a single moment. But how could a submarine built to withstand torpedoes and the crushing pressure of the ocean end up as wreckage on the sea floor? And how could the real cause of it all be nothing more than a toilet? This is the complete story of the strangest submarine to sink during World War II. And now, let's say hello to Cerevex. To understand how the submarine met such a bizarre end, we first need to understand why Germany's U-boats were considered the most terrifying weapons at sea. During World War II, Britain relied almost entirely on merchant ships to transport fuel, food, and weapons from the United States and Canada to Europe. If those ships stopped arriving, Britain would face a devastating crisis that could completely change the course of the war. That was where Germany wanted its U-boats to make the difference. U-boats would hide beneath the ocean for hours, sometimes even days, waiting for a convoy to pass overhead. Then they would silently move into position, fire their torpedoes, and disappear beneath the waves once again. In many cases, the crews aboard the merchant ships never even knew where the attack had come from. For that reason, thousands of ships were sunk during the war. Tens of thousands of sailors lost their lives, and Germany's U-boats became a true nightmare for the Allies. But here's the question. If these submarines were so powerful, how could they be defeated by a problem inside a toilet? To answer that question, we first have to take a closer look at the submarine itself. The U-1206 was one of Germany's Type 7 sea submarines, the most widely used class in the German Navy. It measured more than 67 meters long and carried 5 torpedo tubes, an anti-aircraft gun, diesel engines for surface travel, and electric motors that allowed it to move almost silently while submerged. But life inside the submarine was nothing like what you see in the movies. More than 50 men lived together in an incredibly cramped space. There were no private cabins, and there weren't enough bunks for everyone, so sailors had to take turns sleeping. Food was stored almost everywhere, even between the torpedoes, because there simply wasn't enough room. As the days passed, the air grew heavier. Humidity increased, and the smell of fuel and machine oil filled every corner of the submarine. Yet the crew grew used to these conditions because they were simply part of everyday life beneath the sea. Commanding the submarine was German officer Karl Adolf Schlitt. He was not one of Germany's famous U-boat commanders. He was a young captain on his very first combat patrol. To him, this mission was an opportunity to prove himself, and his crew trusted that their captain would bring them home safely. That morning, everything was peaceful. The sonar detected no enemy ships. No British aircraft appeared overhead. The engines were operating perfectly. There was absolutely no reason to worry, but among all the complex systems inside the submarine, there was one system that was just as complicated as the engines or the torpedoes: the toilet. It may sound funny, but for submarine engineers, disposing of human waste dozens of meters beneath the ocean's surface was an enormous engineering challenge. But why? Because the pressure of the seawater outside the submarine was enormous. If any valve connected directly to the ocean was opened, the waste wouldn't flow out. Instead, seawater would rush into the submarine with enough force to flood it within minutes. That's why German engineers designed an incredibly sophisticated system that relied on a series of valves and a pressure tank. The waste was first transferred into this tank. Then compressed air was pumped into it until the pressure inside nearly matched the pressure of the sea outside. Only then could the outer valve be opened safely, allowing the waste to be expelled before the valve was immediately closed again to prevent seawater from flowing back inside. It was a brilliant engineering design, but it was also extremely unforgiving. If a single valve was opened at the wrong moment, or if one step was performed out of order, that engineering masterpiece could instantly become a disaster. For that reason, a specially trained crewman was assigned to operate the system, and official procedures required calling him whenever anyone had trouble using the toilet. But on the morning of April 14th, Captain Karl Adolf Schlitt entered the bathroom. Only a few minutes later, the mistake that no one expected happened. A mistake that would force more than 50 men to fight for their lives. Not against the enemy, but against their own submarine. The moment the captain accidentally operated the toilet system incorrectly, the crewman responsible for the system was immediately called in. As he tried to return the valves to the correct sequence, the worst possible scenario unfolded. One of the valves was opened the wrong way, and suddenly, seawater from the North Sea burst into the submarine with tremendous force. Within seconds, alarm sirens echoed throughout every compartment. Crew members rushed toward the source of the leak. Some tried to shut the valves, while others activated the pumps in an attempt to force the water back out. At first, everyone believed the situation was still under control, but they had no idea that the real disaster had yet to begin. Why were just a few gallons of seawater so terrifying? Because the water didn't simply flood the floor of the submarine. It reached the battery compartment. The submarine relied on massive lead-acid batteries to power its electric motors while submerged. When the salty seawater mixed with the sulfuric acid inside those batteries, a dangerous chemical reaction occurred, producing chlorine gas. If that name sounds familiar, it's because chlorine gas was the very same chemical weapon used during World War I. Within minutes, the toxic gas spread through the submarine's narrow passageways. The air became impossible to breathe. Some sailors began coughing violently, while others felt their eyes burning and struggled more and more to breathe. At that moment, Captain Karl Adolf Schlitt realized the mission was over, but the hardest question still remained. How could he save his crew? If he stayed underwater, everyone would eventually suffocate from the chlorine gas. If he surfaced, the submarine would immediately reveal its position to the Allied forces. He had to choose between certain death or a small chance of survival. In the end, he gave the order to surface. A few minutes later, the submarine broke through the surface of the sea. But just as the captain had feared, it didn't take long for British forces near the Scottish coast to spot it. Soon, Allied aircraft and naval vessels rushed toward its position. The submarine could no longer dive. Its crew could no longer fight after the poisonous gas had spread throughout the vessel. Captain Schlitt realized there was no saving the submarine, so he issued his final orders. Abandon the submarine. Then open the scuttling valves to sink her before she could fall into British hands. The crew jumped into the freezing waters of the North Sea as U-1206 slowly began sinking toward the ocean floor. Within minutes, she disappeared beneath the waves forever. Most of the crew survived and were taken prisoner by British forces, while 3 sailors lost their lives during the evacuation. Captain Karl Adolf Schlitt survived the incident and spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner before being released after the war ended. Even after decades have passed, the story of U-1206 is still taught as one of the strangest military disasters in history. But the truth is, the toilet alone did not sink the submarine. The real cause was a chain of unfortunate mistakes combined with an extremely complex engineering system, the crushing pressure of the deep ocean, and the unforgiving conditions of wartime, where even the smallest error could become fatal. Sometimes, it doesn't take a massive battle or a gigantic explosion to create a disaster. All it takes is one small mistake in the wrong place at the wrong time to change the fate of an entire submarine and earn a permanent place in the pages of history.